and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. We have a very special episode for you tonight. We welcome first-time guest to the show, Russ Breault, a highly regarded expert on the Shroud of Turin, believed by many to be the actual birth cloth that wrapped Jesus in the tomb, burial cloth. He has published his first book on the subject, 5 years in the making. Thousands nationwide have seen his critically acclaimed big screen presentation known as Shroud Encounter. The book is put out under the same title with the subtitle, Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery, and published by Covenant Books. Russ Breault is president and founder of the Shroud of Turin Education Project Incorporated and has been featured in several national documentaries seen on CBS, History Channel, EWTN, and Discovery. He has been interviewed for Good Morning America and ABC World News Tonight and was a consultant for CNN's Finding Jesus series. He has presented at numerous colleges and universities, including Duke, West Point, Johns Hopkins, Penn State, and many others. So we're very excited to welcome Russ Breault onto the show today. Great to have you on the show, Russ. How are you doing?
It's great to be here, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making time for this. This is a topic I've always been fascinated about, and I'm excited to get into it. But as is tradition on the show for all first-time guests, can you share with us your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
Yeah, I grew up in a essentially an atheist home. My parents were both Catholic, grew up Catholic, but then my dad fell away from the faith, and by the time I came along, he had become a professing atheist, and the sermon that I heard growing up was, "Son, there is no God. Religion is fine for those who need it, but I see it as nothing more than a crutch for the weak." And so he was career Navy, so I saluted him and said, "Yes, sir, you must be right." But at the age of 23, however, with the help of a Bible that I stole from a hotel room, began reading on it, and 6 months later, I realized Jesus is real, and he's not in me, but he could be. And so I asked him into my life, and that was really how I came to faith. And now I'm going to date myself as if this was all the way back in February of 1977, and then a year and a half later, I hear about this team of scientists going to Turin to study a religious artifact that purported to be the burial shroud that wrapped Jesus. And well, when I got born again, I was very zealous. I wanted everyone to get saved right now, and of course that doesn't work. And so it's important to know that I don't, as many on your podcast and yourself, and we're not saying that we need the shroud or some piece of evidence to support our faith. I was a believer before I ever knew about the shroud. My interest in this subject is from an apologetic standpoint, and can the shroud be used to present the gospel in this fashion that is so mysterious and steeped in science and history, and so, as I always say, as you explore the mystery, you encounter the message, and the message of the shroud is pure gospel. And so that's kind of how I became a believer, and how I got interested in the shroud, because I was interested in reaching all my unsaved friends and family members, and so that's kind of how I got here.
Amen. That's great. And yeah, I like what you said, that we don't need the shroud to be real to have our faith. Our faith isn't rooted in that, but man, if it's real, I mean, we would want to know that. Can you share a little bit about what readers will find in your new book, Shroud Encounter?
Well, I'll hold it up right here. It's Shroud Encounter: Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery, and it's we're going to cover all of the science. We're going to cover all of the history, which takes it back, with documented sources all the way back to the 3rd century, and we're going to so we'll definitely look at the trail of science and look at the historical trail, and then we'll also look at some of what the implications may mean. I mean, we're all here wondering. We're saying, what if people will say to me, well, what if it's not authentic? And I say, that's the wrong question. What if it is authentic and we did nothing with it? What would be the greater sin? Because what you're going to read in this book and in other documentaries and other things, you'll realize is that there's this very clear either or proposition with the shroud, and that it either is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus or it's not. And if it's not, well, then what is it? If it's not authentic, then it must be the work of human effort somehow, some way. And so, is it just a masterful work of art? Is it just a phenomenal hoax? Because you see, here's one of the clear things that we know from all the science is that there's no visible trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, or stain. There are no artistic substances on the cloth to account for the image. Now, let me just explain what you'll see on the shroud. The shroud is 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, long enough to envelop about a 5'10" man lengthwise. Okay, and on this cloth, you'll see the front and back image of this man, very faint. It's not easy to see. And then on top of that, you'll see an entire pattern of bloodstains that correlate with the wounds of crucifixion, starting with about 30 puncture wounds around the head that would correlate with a crown of thorns. And of course, so, all this is important is because, if it's not the work of an artist, then it must be authentic. But wait. How do you know it's Jesus? It could be, thousands of people were crucified. It could be the shroud of anybody. And so then that's when we have to apply forensic analysis to identify the man based on the wounds. And so when we see the crown of thorns, when we see the body scourged massively all over the body, and we know Jesus was scourged, and we see nail wounds in the wrist, we see nail wounds in the feet, we see a wound in the side that occurred because when the soldiers came by, he was already dead. They didn't break his legs. And it's so everything about the shroud wound-wise correlates with what we know what happened to Jesus very specifically. And so for instance, there's some very nuanced things where we see the nail wound in the wrist. But artistically, all through the Middle Ages, the nail's been in the palm of the hand. So why would the nail be in the wrist? Well, now we know through medical research that a nail through the palm of the hand won't hold the weight of a crucified man. Not all day long, it won't. It'll eventually rip through the fleshy part between the fingers, and so the nail had to be in the wrist. That's where we see it on the shroud. And when the nail penetrates the wrist, it cuts nerves and tendons and causes the thumbs to jerk it into the center of the palm. No thumbs visible on the shroud. And so these are just some nuances things. And then we have a massive scourging. Why was Jesus scourged so badly? But because, most people were either scourged and released as a form of punishment, or they were crucified. Now, if they were scourged lightly, is because the Romans expected those who were crucified to stay alive on the cross all day long. And it's but so why was Jesus scourged so badly? Because Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, didn't think Jesus was guilty of a crime worthy of capital punishment. He didn't want to kill him. And so the first thing he did, he sent him to King Herod, and Herod sent him back, right? And then he tried to trade Barabbas, and that didn't work. And so finally he has him scourged to within an inch of his life, thinking that when this bloodied hulk of a man came walking back into the courtyard, that they'd say, okay, that's enough. You don't have to kill him. But that's not what happened. So in spite of being brutally scourged, he was still crucified. And that's exactly what we see on the shroud. So forensically, I would say there's only one person that would correlate with all these specific wounds. And then you have the unique anomaly of the fact that this burial shroud clearly has wrapped a corpse, and yet it's a very finely woven cloth. It's made of a 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave, made out of flax. It's it's a very complex weave, and yet at the same time, it's doable in first century using first century loom technology. We have found examples of it, but not very often. And why? Because Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, purchased a fine linen cloth. So everything about the manufacture of the cloth correlates with something that Joseph of Arimathea, member of the Sanhedrin, would have had the means to purchase. And so again, that's another correlation. And so I mean, at the end of the day, I'm saying this. I don't know that the shroud is in fact the burial shroud of Jesus. We don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up with something we might extract from the shroud, but we can prove what it's not, and it's not the work of an artist. And so it becomes up to the individual to make a decision as to what the shroud is. And I'll just end this segment with just saying that there was a church I went out to several times, out in Salt Lake City, and I did a presentation out there, and then I went back the following year and was walking into the foyer of the church with the pastor. We had gone out to lunch, and there's this woman standing in the foyer, and she's wearing a postal uniform, and she looks at me and says, she's wagging her finger and says, "I know you. You're the shroud guy." And I said, "Guilty as charged." And so she says, "Well, I have something to tell you." And I said, "Well, I'd love to hear it." And so she says, "Well, remember when you were here last year?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you know what? I gave my life to Christ. And the boyfriend who I was living with at the time, we got married. He gave his life to Christ. We got married. And now we both come to this church." So I asked her, I said, "What was so compelling about the shroud for you?" And she said this, and it's so perfect. She says, "It makes it real." Because nothing that anyone had ever said or done had made it real. And all of a sudden, she sees it all come alive on the screen with the shroud, and it makes it real. That's what I hear all the time, is that people have heard messages of the gospel. People may have witnessed to them. Maybe they grew up in church. There was a Catholic church I was at maybe 4 or 5 years ago up in Rhode Island. It was a standing room only event, and as I'm walking off the stage, this elderly gentleman grabs me by the hand, pulls me over to him, and looks me in the face, and he says, "I just want you to know I've waited 84 years for this day." Something clicked. He'd been to church all his life. He went through the motions of Christianity, but it never really made sense until he understood it through what was presented on the shroud. And so, I'm not saying that anyone needs evidence, but there's an interesting verse in John 14:11. Jesus says, "If you cannot believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me because of the words that I say, then at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves." To me, that's Jesus saying, "Look, I don't care how you come to faith, as long as you do." And then when Paul says that I became all things to all people so that by any means some might be saved, that's telling me that, yeah, maybe the shroud is an example that God gives, that he really, he pulls out all the stops. I tell people all the time that the shroud, in my opinion, can lead someone up to the water's edge. Just like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. The shroud can take you right up to the water's edge, but it's not a replacement for faith. You still have to make a decision to receive Christ for yourself. He's not in an old linen cloth. He might have been for like a couple days, 2,000 years ago, but he's not there now. But it gives witness to that event, and so that's what I think the shroud is all about from the standpoint of apologetics.
Yeah, and that's a great explanation too, because I mean, even Thomas, he wanted some kind of physical hard proof before he was gonna believe, and Jesus provided that to him. So I'm not bothered by the fact that if the shroud is real, that God could have allowed us to have that for some people who might just need that little bit of extra evidence to make that step of faith, because everybody's different. And do you think this is why this artifact has attracted so much attention and intrigue over the centuries?
Well, clearly, it is it. People look through different lenses at different times in history. But I will say, just back to Thomas for a minute, is that people oftentimes say, yeah, but didn't Jesus say, "Blessed are those who believe and have not seen"? Yes, absolutely. Blessed are those who can muster faith without needing evidence. But God did not condemn Thomas for his unbelief. And it's really important that because Thomas, from that standpoint, represents an element of humanity that might need something like this. And it's but the shroud has impacted people in different ways. The In the history of the shroud, it's the legend and folklore talks about the apostle Jude Thaddeus, who takes a mysterious linen cloth to Edessa, which today would be in southern Turkey, about 400 miles north of Jerusalem, and it's circa first century. And the legend, various versions of this legend would indicate that King Abgar the Fifth of Edessa was dying of leprosy, sends a messenger down to Jerusalem, and Jesus was known all throughout Syria as doing this amazing healing. Everyone in the known world knew there was some, amazing things happening down in Jerusalem at the hands of this Jesus of Nazareth, and so the messenger his job was to find Jesus and ask him to come back to Edessa to bring healing to him, but obviously Jesus had other plans, and the story then goes is that Jesus responded in a dictated letter saying, "I'll send one of my followers later who will bring healing to you and your family." And so Jude Thaddeus ends up being that follower, and so Abgar is healed of leprosy. He becomes a believer, and but eventually he dies by natural means, and persecution starts sweeping the city. And so this cloth was hidden inside the west gate of the city, bricked up into a wall and hidden away, and literally forgotten about for 400 years, until 525 comes along and a severe flood. And in the rebuilding of the city, they rediscover, bricked up in a wall, a mysterious cloth with a mysterious image on it. Well, now we're 200 years past Constantine. It's safe to be a Christian now. And so from that point on, it becomes known as the true likeness of Christ, not made by human hands. And so from the early 6th century, from the rediscovery of this mysterious cloth, all of your icon images of Jesus change, and they change dramatically to feature a man with long hair, full beard, large eyes, flattened nose, stylistically looking very similar to what we see on the shroud. In fact, it instructs our view of what Jesus looked like even today. Are you going to have a picture of a short-haired Jesus? No, you're not. And because you just watched The Chosen, I mean, it's even today. This instructs our view, our understanding of what Jesus looked like, and so for the early Christians, they were battling Gnosticism, which says that Jesus really didn't come in the flesh. So these early icon images of Jesus based on the shroud was saying, "Oh yes, he did, and this is what he looked like." And but then later on, it's eventually taken to Constantinople in 944. It's there for 260 years, and then stolen in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, stolen by the French, and then goes underground for about 150 years, and then reappears in Lorraine, France, in 1356. Now, this is 4 years after the end of the Black Death, the bubonic plague, that for over from 1240 from 1348 to 1352, literally half of the European population was killed by this bubonic plague. And so in 1356, the cloth is revealed in Lorraine, France, and people flock to it because they've been decimated. And here's this cloth that just offers hope to the people, hope of that Christ is real, hope of his resurrection. Here's a man who participated in sufferings as great as our sufferings have been, and it's and then we fast forward to 1898 when it was photographed for the very first time, and suddenly we realized that the shroud image looks a whole lot clearer, a whole lot more lifelike in a photo negative. And so that discovery was what launched the shroud into the realm of scientific investigation, and then that's what got a lot of Protestants involved. So you have the Orthodox involved from the very beginning. Then it moves and it's taken to France and becomes associated with the Catholic Church. And it goes in France for a while, then Italy, and then now it's and so again in 1898, it launched into science, and then you had a whole team of scientists in 78 that went over there. 33 American scientists, most of whom were Protestants and Jewish, and you had a handful of Catholics, but it was a totally, eclectic group, and most of them didn't even believe the shroud could be authentic. They thought it would be quickly find it was some kind of artwork, and then have the rest of the time to go see Venice and Florence. Yeah, sure, let's go. And it's so it's really kind of spoken to people at different times in different ways. Now the question is, we have to ask, how is it speaking to this generation? How is it speaking to the world today? And I think personally, it's speaking to a generation that has come to believe that science has all the answers, and yet it's that very same science that testifies to the likely authenticity of the shroud. And so a lot of people say, can science and faith ever meet? Yeah, they did in 5 days in October in 1978. And science came away wondering, and we still don't have an answer.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question. So for today, what are, let's say, the top 3 attributes of the shroud that continue to mystify people?
Number one, again, we've talked about that there's no trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye. Even more than that, we have to realize that this image affects only the top 1 to 2 microfibers, not threads, microfibers. Each individual thread is made up of about 200 microfibers. So this image resides on about 1% of a single thread. I mean, it's astonishingly superficial. And it's so superficial, in fact, that if you were to see it in Turin for yourself, and if you could get closer than 6 feet, it would disappear. You'd see the bloodstains, but the image itself would where is it? I can't see it. You have to stand back from it in order to see it because it's so superficial. And so, and it's very important to know that this depth of penetration into the cloth is uniform over the entire cloth, whether we're talking about the frontal image or the dorsal image, it doesn't matter. It's the same image intensity throughout. It seems like you need a piece of technology to accomplish something like that. And so that to me is mystery number 1. And then, mystery number 2 would be the fact that you clearly have a superficial image, and yet the blood stains soak all the way through the cloth. So in other words, so when you look at the shroud, the first thing you'll notice are these pattern of burns and patches from a fire in 1532. It was kept in a silver box. The top of the box melted, and a glob of molten silver fell down onto the cloth to like one corner, creating this kind of origami burn pattern. And so the first thing you'll notice are burns and patches and scorch marks and kind of like parallel lines. And in between those lines is the image. Okay, and so what's intriguing then is that so when they had the fire, it was doused with water. So you have water stains, you have burns, you have blood stains. If you take the cloth and flip it over, you'll see the blood stains, you'll see the water stains, you'll see the burns, but you will not see the image of the man. The image of the man is a purely superficial phenomenon, only affecting the top 1 to 2 microfibers. But here's very important, is that there's no image under the blood. That's important. If there's no image under the blood, then that tells you that the blood was on the cloth first, followed by the image. Now that makes sense if it's authentic, Good Friday followed by Easter Sunday, but it makes no sense if it's the work of an artist. Why would he do that? Why would an artist, craft a whole pattern of bloodstains over the entire body, and then try to craft an image around it? It would just never happen. Every attempt to show how some alleged artist came up with this, they all do the same thing. They use a different technique. Well, and they all look pretty terrible. A few of them look decent from a distance, but here's what they all do. They craft their image and then they just paint the blood where it's supposed to go. No, that's not what we see on the shroud. There's no image under the blood. So if you're going to replicate this cloth and this image, you've got to do that. You have to apply your blood stains first and then craft the image around it, and which would be literally impossible in my view. In fact, we know this is true is because there's even a slight misregistration of the image and the blood stains on the legs, where we see some of the scourge marks seem to be off the leg itself. Now, why would that be? Because they happened at different times. So when Jesus' body was when he died, within an hour, the body goes into complete stiffness. It goes into complete rigor mortis. Everything is stiff. But then over the course of 24 to 36 hours, rigor mortis eases and then relaxes, which would account for maybe a partial shift in the cloth, just ever so slightly. And so which is another proof, if you will, that these are two separate events that happen at two separate times. And it's and then we also know that I don't know, those are I don't know if I want to go into, I don't know, is there another one? Those are pretty big.
Well, it's amazing to think about. So even if an artist could pull that off practically, which there's no way that we know how that could even be done, who is going to have the foresight to think about, the crucifixion and all the wounds that come with that as one event, and then a few days later knowing all the rigor mortis stuff, and then even thinking of the resurrection as something that would imprint this image on the cloth, thinking of that as a separate event, and then absolutely take no credit for it. I mean, this would be the greatest work of art in all of human history, and yet nobody ever took credit for it. Like that to me says that this has got to be something way beyond art. One thing I wanted to ask too, a lot of people are under the impression that this was dated to the Middle Ages. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, it's a testimony to why people should follow instructions. And in 1988, three carbon dating labs were given a sample. So it's important to understand what happened versus what was supposed to happen. They were supposed to cut 3 different samples from 3 different locations on the cloth. They didn't do that. They cut one sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of times over the centuries. And I mean that. Held and handled when this is before it was ever installed in the main cathedral in 1694. But ever since 1413, there's been public displays of the shroud they build platforms outside, and they would have a line of 6 or so clerics standing up on a platform. Remember, this is 14 feet long, and they would all be holding the cloth right at that exact spot where it's cut, and holding it up for hours. And then we know that this has occurred over 275 times between 1413 and 1694. So if you were looking for the worst possible sample location to cut your sample, we'd cut there at the corner. And of course, that's what they did. And so now enter Ray Rogers, a thermal chemist with Los Alamos National Laboratory. He begins to suspect that maybe this corner doesn't seem to be fully representative of the entire cloth, and so he obtains a thread sample from that corner that was cut for carbon dating, and he compares it with a thread sample from the rest of the cloth, and lo and behold, they're not the same. And so, in other words, he finds cotton in that corner. There's no cotton anywhere else on the shroud. It's made out of flax, and he finds a madder root dye. It's some kind of a dye that was put into that corner, maybe to blend in the newer, brighter cotton threads. And there's a presence of starch to stiffen the threads, maybe to affect some kind of repair. So in other words, we're not sure what we dated. And to add even more nonsense to this whole thing, it's been out in the past month or so. There's been this crisis in academia of all this fraudulent papers. People. They're literally one publishing arm had to withdraw 11,000 papers that had been published because their data was falsified, and it was. So you've had this crisis in academia going on for a long time. And lo and behold, we find out that it's actually happened to the shroud itself. Is because in 1988, you had 3 carbon dating labs that were supposed to, and the British Museum acted as kind of the overseer of it. And so all the data was then submitted to the British Museum. And then the British Museum, collected it all, collated it, and whatever, and then gave it to Nature, which is a British journal, that then published the results in 1989. But what's interesting is the British Museum didn't publish all of the data. They didn't give all of the data to the journal Nature, and we asked for years that this would be released to us. Finally, under the duress of a Freedom of Information Act, in 2017, this data was finally released to us. A French researcher by the name of Tristan Casabianca led this team. They took a year or more to go through it. Published in Archaeometry, which is a peer-reviewed journal published by Oxford, and showing that they had withheld many different outlier dates. So there were dates that were earlier, there were dates that were older, younger, and all this aberrant dates showed the reason that they did not submit this to the journal Nature is if they had, they would never been able to achieve their 95% confidence factor. They would have assumed that this sample is not representative of the entire cloth. There's too many outliers. And so what did they do? They fudged the data. And just like what's happening right now. And it's so now we in fact there were 3 labs involved. There's this unspoken thing between the labs that if you're using multiple laboratories, that there needs to be at least a 60% correlation between the 3 labs. Now, I don't see, that's very broad in my view. Why not 80%? But let's say it's 60. But when you include all of the data that was excluded, that correlation drops to 29%. No wonder they didn't release all of the data. So all this does is prove that there's something going on with that corner, making it that it's not representative of the entire cloth. Now, contamination, reweave, neutron flux, who knows? But so now but however, there's some new dating methodologies now that are indicating first century. And so I'd say that the carbon date would be inconclusive, but now there's new dating methodologies, like I say, that are now suggesting first century. That's really good stuff. So.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the kind of stuff that excites me about this. That there are these continuing developments with this. What keeps you interested in the Shroud after all these years?
To me, it's all about potential. I have had a tagline for years and years: explore the mystery, encounter the message. But I'm kind of moving beyond that, and what I want to say now is for people, your listening audience, to pick up a book, read some papers or some research on it. You'll watch some videos, take an interest in the subject, and then what does that allow you to do? It's like, you're talking to somebody, where evangelicals are supposed to evangelize, and yet they never do. They don't. I mean, when was the last time anyone actually sat down and shared their faith with someone and actually, to other than just saying, "Hey, why don't you come to my church?" I mean, that's about the extent of evangelism. But what you can do is, whether it's my book or another book, doesn't matter. Just take an interest in it and just say, I've been reading about the Shroud of Turin. What's the Shroud of Turin? Well, there you go. You can't talk about the Shroud without talking about Jesus. That's impossible. And so, what makes the Shroud so special? Well, let me show you. And so you use the Shroud as a vehicle to talk about the faith. And so I say, use the mystery to share the faith. And it's I think that's why it exists. Like I said, it reaches people at different epochs of time, but we're at a different time now. I mean, it's like when Jesus, what did he say to the Pharisees? How is it that you can read the signs of the weather, but you cannot read the signs of the times? And Jesus had a declarative statement. He said, "Watch and know that when these things begin to happen, that I'm near, that I'm right at the door." So we should all be cognizant of the times that we are in, and I think there's many people in everyone who's watching this has people in their lives that do not know Christ, and the Shroud. I'm not saying the Shroud is the answer to every one of them, but I guarantee you, there's a few people in your life that would be intrigued by something like the Shroud, and I've been looking at this mystery, and they call it the world's greatest unsolved mystery. Now, why is it the world's greatest unsolved mystery? There's lots of unsolved mysteries. What makes the Shroud the greatest unsolved mystery? Because it's the greatest message ever told. I mean, think about it. If the Shroud's authentic, then that makes it the most important artifact on the planet. I mean, you got to wrap your head through, what if God the Father really did send his Son into the world to become a human being, to become one of us? What if he really did live a sinless life? What if he did really, go to the cross and endure all of what he had to endure on the cross for us? I mean, what if that really did happen? And what if, just, because it's interesting from an apologetic standpoint. Mary Magdalene, Sunday morning, she goes to the tomb. She finds that the stone is already rolled away aside from the entrance. She peeks in, sees the body's gone, runs to find the apostles. And then she says this: "Someone has taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and I don't know where they put him." She thinks the body's stolen. So Peter and John run back down to the tomb. John lets everyone know that he got there first. Peter finally gets there. He goes straight inside the tomb, sees the linen cloth lying there. Then John goes in. He sees the linen cloth lying there and believes. Believes what? Well, believe that he had risen. I mean, that's why you had soldiers out in front of the tomb to guard it. I mean, they're not guarding everybody's tomb. I mean, Jesus, it was this rumor that Jesus was going to rise from the dead because he said he would on three different occasions. And so when John sees this empty linen shroud lying on the stone slab, he says, it happened. It happened. He really did rise again from the dead, just like he said. And so now think of it. This is really important. So it was the linen cloth lying there that became the first piece of evidence that Jesus had risen from the dead. And John becomes the first of the apostles to believe in the resurrection based on that evidence. So now we have to ask this question then. So was that cloth left in the tomb only for the benefit of Peter and John? Or was it for the benefit of the whole world throughout all generations? Now, what do you think? Looking at the heart of God and what the intention of God is that all would come into a knowledge of Christ. I mean, it wasn't a private event, and so I don't see why it's such a stretch to believe that they kept this cloth and preserved it, but they got it out of Jerusalem as fast as they could because otherwise it would have been destroyed. Either the Jews would have destroyed it or the Romans would have destroyed it. So not knowing what to do with it, quite a conundrum for the Jews. It's doubly unclean. It's covered with blood and wrapped a corpse. Let's just give it to the Gentiles and let them figure out what to do with it. And that's why it ended up in Edessa, and just a few years afterwards. So, I think the shroud can just say this: as you explore the mystery, you encounter the message. I think you use that mystery to share the message of your faith. I think it's a tool. I think it's something. Well, someone's called it a visual gospel. Even a gospel written on linen. Speaks every language, has no need to be translated, and also speaks to every level. A 5-year-old can look. A 5-year-old who can't even read can look at the shroud and say, "Look, mommy, look, daddy, there's Jesus." A teenager can look at it and say, "Wow, this is really cool." When you look at all the science that's gone into it, and then the academic, the intellectual, can take it as deep as they want to go into the theology, the history, the science, and so. It speaks to every level, and it speaks every language, and so I just think maybe it speaks to this generation in a whole different way than it has in past generations.
Amen. I completely agree with you. Well, in a moment, there's a whole other layer to this. I want to ask you about the Holy Fire miracle, which is absolutely mind-blowing, and the audience is going to want to stick around for that, for sure. But before I do, where can people pick up your book and follow you online?
Well, you can follow me. You can order the book and follow me online at ShroudEncounter.com. And there's a little tab at the top right-hand corner that says Shop. It'll take you to this little store. You can buy the book right there. Or you can buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And eventually it'll be everywhere online, but it just came out. So if you go to... If you go to one of those sites, Amazon, or you just search for Shroud Encounter or my name, Russ Breault, and you'll find it. It's so.
Excellent. And I'll add too, for the audience, if you go to prophecywatchers.com and just type in, click on the store and type in Russ's name, it's just Russ, and Breault is Breault. You're going to find a whole bunch of extra materials. There's lots of videos. There's lots more evidence about the shroud. Even has the Holy Fire package there with a whole bunch of stuff in there. So if you go to prophecywatchers.com, you'll be able to see that there. All right. Well, we have a lot more to talk about with Russ Breault, but we're going to do that in the members only section. So if you haven't had a chance yet, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And I suggest getting the $100 a year if you can do it, because it's cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free doing it that way. If you're viewing right now on dailyrenegade.com, just hang on the line and we'll get back to our conversation very, very soon. Everyone else viewing for free on YouTube or elsewhere, thank you so much. And until next time, take care and God bless.